Cameron, do you want your last name mentioned for the intro?
Sure, why not?
What is the last name?
Call, C-A-L-L.
Okay.
So Seamus, we are live now. We've got some people tuning in. So you might want to, just do some intros or something like that. I'm going to jump off and let you guys take it from here.
Thanks, Jordan. Okay, I guess let me just say a couple things. My name is Seamus Clark. I'm a volunteer with Portland Tenants United. And maybe I'll just start by going a bit over the agenda we have right now. We have panelists, so this is a webinar format kind of Zoom call. So to start with, the panelists will have the ability to talk when they're turned on the agenda. Other people can jump on the chat, either on the Facebook or via the Zoom chat, and make comments. And I'll update that announcement as we go on. So people can put comments in the chat section that we can then take out for after the panelists and have a discussion, a Q&A format that way. Or we can have people after the panelists talk, get on the video if they'd like instead. You can also ask questions in the Facebook chat as well. But basically, this is an event where we want to talk about rent forgiveness and the need for that to happen. Since the COVID crisis, there is an economic crisis happening, and that has created and exacerbated the housing crisis. So simply put, people can't pay the rent because they have no income, or they're paying the rent when they should be buying food instead. And in response, we're going to have some examples today of tenants who've organized in their complex to combat this experience. We have two great stories of tenants who've organized with their neighbors and made demands upon their landlord and property manager, and they will tell their stories. We're also going to have a couple of people talk about the law, what has happened thus far, and what needs to happen going forward. And we're going to have a discussion about how tenants are being treated and the solution to that. PTU has a tenant protection ordinance that we're going to talk about briefly, and how that is connected to this crisis currently. And let me just go over the agenda real quick. Mark Black will speak first. I'll introduce her, and she'll talk about the law, the eviction moratorium, the implications for tenants now, and what's going to happen after that moratorium is lifted in the near future. Lauren Everett from PTU will speak after her about the tenant protection ordinance, how that is needed and how it can be passed at a city level. After that, we'll have Cameron Call with the North Portland Tenants Collective to talk about their experience organizing with their neighbors. After that, we'll have Sean Perez. Is that right, Sean? Might have said his last name wrong. And he has a very good story about organizing in Northwest Portland with his neighbors. And we picked both these examples of tenants organizing because they have such good tactics and strategies that they've used, very good instinctive organizing skills that in some ways are going to be a good example for other tenants elsewhere to use when you have to, have solutions to your problems with your neighbors as well. So since we're live on Facebook already, maybe we'll just start and have Margot go ahead. Margot Black is the co-chair of Portland Tenants United. She's also a candidate for Portland City Commissioner #2. Election is Tuesday. She's going to talk about the law, the eviction moratorium, and I'll let her go from here.
Okay. Hi. I assume everybody can see and hear me. This is, I think, my first webinar as well. So my name is Margot Black. I am the co-chair of Portland Tenants United. a tenants union that formed in 2015 as we were seeing rents skyrocket, whole buildings be no cause evicted, and it just didn't feel like anyone was doing anything about it, and renters were feeling pretty powerless and despondent. And we realized that together, through leveraging our collective power to pay the rent, which is what our landlords rely on, we can come together in an organized way, have solidarity with each other to make changes, either by unionizing in our apartment complexes, as you'll hear some stories about tonight, building the movement using militant direct action to motivate our landlords to negotiate with us and listen to our needs, and also to put pressure on politicians to make the policy level changes that we need. And we've seen a lot of success with that over the last several years. And now I am a current candidate for Portland City Council as sort of, a tactic in this bigger movement of justice for tenants and housing. And so I just want to introduce myself and make that clear that I'm running for city council as a candidate who has helped build this movement, fight for this movement, and sees what all still needs to be done and how having somebody in a position of power can help us push those things forward. So let's talk about where we are right now relative to COVID-19 and the global economy coming to a pretty much complete stop in mid-March, and what that means for renters and the rent, especially as so many of us have lost our jobs, become furloughed, seen our incomes decline, have to stay home because of our own health issues, or because our kids are out of school, or because of the health issues of our kids, or of the people that we're caring for. Meanwhile, the rent was already too high before COVID for so many folks. I go to eviction court often with tenants when they need me to and ask, and I do that in a kind of a support role, just to be somebody who knows, because I'm not an attorney, just to be somebody who knows the process and who is not, currently experiencing the fear and trauma of being evicted. And so when I go to eviction court, I can kind of be the calm head, have a calm head on my shoulders and be a support to the next person. And prior to COVID, in Multnomah County, we would have on any given day, 20 to 40 people in eviction court. Those people, 90% of them are there because non-payment of rent. In the state of Oregon, if you are $1 short on rent by the 13th of the month, the only thing preventing you from being evicted is really your landlord's mercy, because at that point, they have full legal rights to terminate your tenancy and have a sheriff come lock you out. Now, of course, they have to go through a court process, but if they don't want to work with you, they don't have to. And it's an expedited process. It's the fastest civil legal procedure in the state of Oregon behind a restraining order. It is very inexpensive. There's a law firm in the city of Portland. There's really 2 or 3 law firms that represent almost all of the landlords. Greenspoon Martyr is one of the biggest one. Most of the property management companies, including Home Forward and all of our affordable housing providers, use Greenspoon Martyr. They basically pay a per head or a per door retainer fee, and then Greenspoon Martyr does all the work, and it's an eviction mill. At any given time, there are 20 to 40 people, most from low-income housing, who are behind on the rent. That's pre-COVID, okay? And we know that eviction court is translating into people on the streets, people in shelters, people sleeping in cars, people in hotels, people doubling up with relatives. And of course, once you go through that process, it becomes extraordinarily hard to ever regain your footing and procure stable quality housing, because you have an eviction on your record or a filing on your record, you owe your landlord money, you've suffered extreme psychological impacts for the whole process. We learned in Matthew Desmond's book, Evicted, that eviction is not a consequence of poverty. We often think, oh, yeah, when you're poor and that of course you get evicted, life's hard. No, it's actually a cause of poverty. Every time someone is forced from their home through no choice of their own, they have less bargaining and buying power. They move into lower quality housing, and they have a relationship with their landlord where the landlord knows that that person is basically lucky to have any housing at all, and it becomes a vicious cycle that has massive societal and economic impacts that affect not just the person being evicted, but it's what we see driving gentrification and poverty and homelessness and economic inequality. So that was pre-COVID. Now we're looking at 30% unemployment, and so now that very awful process of eviction, which we know causes poverty, is now facing an enormous swath of the population. In Portland, almost 50% of residents are renters, probably more now, but we'll get updated data after the census. Statewide, it's probably a little bit more than 40%. And we know that the median income of renters is quite a bit lower, that they tend to be the contingency workforce, non-unionized, low-wage workers. So these are the people, so these are basically, of the 50% of Portland that are renters, almost all of them are going to be impacted by COVID economically. These are not the folks who are able to continue to work from home, or although a lot of them are essential workers who are now being forced to go to work and put their lives on the line. But we just, the fact is that not having money to pay the rent right now under these conditions is a problem that we don't even have an idea about the size yet, except for that it is massive. And we know in March, Governor Brett, well, first at the city and county level, but then the state level, we got a eviction moratorium. What that means, and I'm not going to go into the weeds on it, but what it means right now is that your landlord can't demand rent from you. You don't have to give them any reason. You don't have to tell them that you lost your job because of COVID. You don't have to provide any documentation to prove it. If you can't pay rent, it's good to let your landlord know. You should let your landlord know as soon as you can. But they can't give you a 72-hour notice. They can't file an eviction with the courts. That's called an FED, in case I mention that later, forced entry and detainer. And most importantly, they can't process that eviction. So there will be no sheriff coming. And that moratorium, and now that's true for non-payment of rent if you owe your landlord money for utilities, if you owe your landlord money for maybe repairs or maintenance that they think you owe them for. Any eviction that is happening or that would normally happen because you should give your landlord money, but you haven't, they can't do that anymore. And they also can't no-cause evict anymore. In Multnomah County, that eviction moratorium has been coupled with a 6-month grace period to repay the rent. And what that means is that as soon as the county, and I believe at this point they're all uniform, but I have to say these things are changing so fast in terms of dates. I'm not keeping track of the exact dates. Let's say July 6th. I think July 6th is the day that the state and county moratorium are currently scheduled to end. And because business is sort of starting to slowly get back up, I would expect that even though so many businesses are still closed, even though so many jobs will not be given back, even though some of the devastating income and economic losses and impacts have already happened and can't unhappen, and nobody will be made whole. It is not. I mean, we should probably expect that in July we will be expected to start paying rent in full again, regardless of our employment status. That evictions and non-payments and late fees, all of that can go back into full throttle mode in July, maybe August. Unless, of course, the emergency order is extended. In Multnomah County, after that, you'll have 6 months to repay any back rent that has accrued. So for folks, let's just go with a $2,000 a month rent. I know that's a little higher than average, but it's not I mean, it's what a lot of people are paying, and it makes the math easy. So let's say you couldn't pay in April, May, June, and July. So now you have an $8,000 debt. Oh, and then your landlord sent out a 9.9% rent increase notice the day after the moratorium went into effect, because we've seen a slew of those. And so now your rent is $2,200, and you have to start paying that in August, and you still don't have a job, or you're not back to full income and full hours. And so you have an $8,000 debt to pay in full by January to your landlord. Plus you have to keep up on your now new higher rent, and of course you don't have a job. And so this is what is the current plan for folks in Multnomah County. Outside of Multnomah County, on July 6th, that $8,000 becomes due. And if you can't pay it, then you would get a 72-hour notice. 4 days later, your landlord could file an FED. So we're going to start to see an enormous eviction crisis happen in the state of Oregon after, mid-July. And then it's going to continue to be a huge thing. And then we're going to see another huge round of issues in January when all of the Multnomah County rents come due. And of course, as you know, in August, when you can't pay your $2,200 rent because your job hasn't, come back to you, you could get immediately evicted for that, even if you regardless of the $8,000 debt you owe before that. So it's real bad, guys. And I'm not trying to confuse you with a bunch of numbers. I'm trying to say that we have been given an impossible hand. All right. Asking that rent to come due for folks who have lost their jobs or lost their income is not realistic. And it is only setting us up for failure. It is setting Portland and Multnomah County and the state of Oregon up for an enormous eviction crisis. And, our housing and homelessness crisis is going to get worse. And meanwhile, are the rents still going to be $2,000 when, we're facing 30% unemployment? So how do we get landlords to lower the rent? How do we get rid of this debt that is an albatross? And how do we deal with all of the other things that we're seeing right now as a consequence of the government saying, hey, landlords, you can't evict your tenants right now. And the landlords come in and saying, all right, well, I'm going to force them out another way. And Lauren will talk more about that. I'm going to talk a little bit on a policy level about it because I'm running for council. What things that we could do at the city level is and something I will do as soon as I win, whether that is outright on Tuesday or in August. And that is that, local rent control is illegal at the state level, or at the state level, they say local jurisdictions can't do rent control. There's a little carve out for states of emergency. You would think one of these would qualify, but the language is a little murky. I say, let's use our emergency local powers. Let's declare a rent freeze. So let's freeze all rent increases right away, because that 9.9% rent increase, that's ridiculous, okay? The mayor says, oh, it's illegal, they'll sue. Let them sue. Let them sue. Let the landlords take us to court and say why they need to give 10% rent increases. Let the governor sit and do nothing about it. Because what the governor could do right away is say no rent increases, okay? In Portland, we have relocation right now that says if a landlord gives you a 10% rent increase, they have to pay for your moving costs. Let's lower that, okay? Why not say if your landlord doesn't renegotiate your rental contract with you to something that is affordable to you under our new economic terms, if they're unwilling to renegotiate down to a fair rental value, then maybe they also pay relo. I mean, that's a tool that we can work with, okay? We can also, one of the ways that we affect change when policymakers can't get it done is tenant organizing. And we're going to hear about tenant organizing. You guys, whether we do it at the policy level or we do it at the demanding our landlord level, either way, it takes people power. It takes organized people power. It takes tenants working together, standing together, making demands, not backing down, and saying, landlords, you can take it or leave it. And policymakers, you better write the laws or else, okay? That's people power. And with both of those, what the city can do in terms of, we can freeze the rent increases, we can pass a tenant protection ordinance, which Lauren's gonna talk about next, and that's to deal with all the other landlord bullying, harassment, intimidation that's happening right now while landlords and tenants are kind of stuck together. And, you know, the rent freeze will freeze rent increases, but what do we do about this debt, right? So I made, I just drew a really pretty picture for you guys and then promptly lost it. Okay, this is a very sophisticated graphic. It's a rent check, all right, for the rent that is too damn high. And I'll explain this in a second. What if, instead of all rent being canceled, and which it should be for people who are making $0 right now and can't pay, what if all housing was affordable? Hear me out. We have all agreed that paying 30% of your income towards housing is affordable. Personally, I want to work on that metric a little bit, but that's another project, okay? Let's say we all agree that as long as I'm not paying more than 30%, which is housing and utilities, by the way, not 30%, then you can afford your housing, all right? You have enough money left over for the rest, okay? So what if we say, hey, landlords, we're willing to keep paying some rent, but only what is affordable. Let's make all housing affordable right now. For those of you who are still working or have some income, that means you agree to pay 30% of your rent or 30% of your income and not more. Just that would be huge. I mean, we already, before COVID, we already knew that half of all renters were paying more than 30%, and those are cost burden renters, and then half of those or more were paying more than 50% of their income in rent. That's inhumane. That doesn't make sense. That's not the market bearing it, okay, in terms of whatever the market will bear. So what if instead of striking and saying we're not paying any more rent again ever, because really when you're striking, you want a demand, right? We're not going to pay rent until. And so what if it was until you renegotiate with us to make our rents affordable? And what we're going to do is we're going to pay 30% of our income in rent. So back to my graphic. Here's the whole rent check. Let's say what you can pay, here's your 30%, okay? And now that's not the whole rent, because the rent was already too damn high for so many of us, working or not, okay? So we're going to pay 30%. That's what we're willing to do as good citizens participating in this, housing ecosystem. Well, the landlord has some bills to pay. They need that money to pay their bills. Maybe they need a little bit more, okay? They have a mortgage to pay. I got to say, I think the banks need to take the hit on the mortgage, and that is something that we continue to work on. But to the extent that a landlord has, whether it's a mortgage to pay or they have maintenance workers to pay, they have their on-site property managers. We don't want those folks to lose their jobs because they're low-wage workers like us. Most of them are renters. So the landlord needs a little bit more to pay off their bills. Okay, so let's call from here to here, they're like operating expenses. And then whatever else is over, that's just pure profit. Okay. Right now, we're all being asked to take a hit. We're being sent home without pay. Our businesses are closing. So the small businesses don't get their income. I mean, everybody's being told to go home and just figure out how to live with less money. Landlords need to do that too. Nobody is entitled to profit right now. So really our job becomes, if renters are able to pay this much, how do we make sure that landlords get this much? And this is where policymakers can fix the problem. We can create a huge pool of money that landlords can apply for, and all they apply for is this amount, okay? And it's not the renters. The renters don't come with all of their pay stubs and prove that they're poor enough and worthy enough, but the landlords come with their pay stubs and say, hey, here's what I need to pay my bills. My renters are paying this much, I need this much. And we say, great, well, right, but we're not gonna use public money to subsidize profits, okay? This is the hit that they have to take. And this is what we can work on as policymakers, is through a combination of different tools and mechanisms, whether it's making housing vouchers, an entitlement program, or whether we make that fund available for landlords to come and apply for. But basically what our, one way forward is renegotiate the rent, make all housing affordable. And then while our economy is kind of, the dust is settling, we're figuring out the rest, we agree, publicly to pay the rest. And that's sort of my thoughts are on moving forward. And it's gonna take a major amount of public pressure. It's gonna take me getting into office, it's gonna take Chloe getting reelected, and it's gonna take tenant power and organizing. Okay, that's the only way we'll get the votes. We have to create the demand. And in the meantime, we need all tenants to be organizing in their apartments like these inspiring folks who are about to speak to us next, and telling their landlords, look, we're willing to pay, but not more than 30%. And for people making $0, that means their rent is $0. And that means the public figures out how to pick up this. Okay, I think I'm done. Tenant power.
Okay, thank you, Margot. Next up, we have Lauren Everett. She is a PTU organizer, and she's going to speak to a policy that PTU has been working on called the Tenant Protection Ordinance. I also want to give a shout out to Commissioner Chloe Daly, who is on our call today. She said she'd rather just listen than speak, which I think is great. I'd encourage you to vote for her. And I can say that as a PTU rep, because we've endorsed her and Margot both. And it's really important that renters have their voice heard in this election. This election is a referendum on the housing crisis. We have two strong candidates running for city council who want to continue the progress we've made as renters. And other people who get elected, we're not going to be their priority. That is just how it works. You know, we have champions, and then we have people who aren't champions. People who might be neutral, or they might be positive towards renters. But Margot and Chloe are proven champions for renters, and it's really important that we have people recognize that and push for that. With that said, I'll have Lauren take it away.
Hey, let me know if there's any sound issues. So the Tenant Protection Ordinance is something that PTU has been working on for at least 6 or 7 months. And it's based on similar legislation in other West Coast cities that already have rent control. So that includes Santa Monica, West Hollywood, Berkeley, and we talked to all those folks, and then also Oakland, San Francisco, and some other places. I think there are also some on the East Coast, but we've mainly been looking at the West Coast ones. So basically a lot of things in a typical tenant protection ordinance, or whatever it happens to be called locally, are already legal. But the idea of this is that it's recognizing that there's a pattern of harassment, and there's an intention of bad faith to get the tenant to leave. So we have modeled ours very closely off of these other jurisdictions. So just to give you some examples, and when I'm done talking, I'm gonna put the link to this in the chat. So quality of housing and services, like getting rid of housing services that are in the lease or contract, not making repairs on time, not following health standards, then invasion of privacy, like abusing the right of access, asking about immigration status, threatening to disclose immigration status, bullying, so verbal abuse, physically harming a resident, damaging a resident's property, misinformation, and this is a really big one right now with the pandemic. So suggesting that there's a legal basis to evict a tenant when there isn't, or making a tenant feel pressured to leave. It's something that happens a lot in housing markets where there's a very high value and a big rent gap between what the landlord could get for the rent and what they are due to the tenant protections. So oftentimes the landlord will offer many buyout offers to the tenant, which could be great if the tenant really just wants to move. But if you don't want to move, you start to get the impression that they're going to get you out either way. So you start to feel like you just are going to have to find somewhere else. So there's a number of things here, making new rules, making rules that don't apply to tenants equally. And again, this is already illegal, but the idea here is that this is recognizing a bad faith effort. So it's not simply that something happens once or twice, or it's an isolated incident. It's that there's an intention here to get the person to leave. So why, again, with tenant protections, landlords get creative. They realize that their usual tactics of no-cause evictions are not going to work, and various other things that they try. So they come up with new solutions. And so that's why all these jurisdictions have enacted this type of legislation. So we have been definitely seeing more creative types of harassment that specifically pertain to the pandemic, like landlord repeatedly asking the tenant when they're going to be paying, I talked to a tenant the other day who felt that she was being treated differently than her neighbor in her duplex because she was not able to pay for the past few months. So it can be something really subtle. And the way that this usually works is that you can pursue this in court with a landlord, but ideally in some jurisdictions, the rental services office or whatever their local equivalent is can actually take complaints. So they can have a process to deal with it internally, including mediation, a hearing, and then if that still doesn't resolve it, the tenant can get a lawyer and then pursue it in court. And I'm also going to put a few examples when I'm done in the chat and see how this has actually been used on the ground in these jurisdictions. So one thing that we are asking also for is for people who have stories of harassment to share your story with us. And there's a link for that on the page that I'm going to post on our website. This is really, really, really important. So you can do this anonymously if you don't feel comfortable. We completely understand that it can potentially be a risk. And if you feel comfortable not being anonymous, that's even better, because if we can use a photograph and kind of make more of a narrative, that's great. But any information is really helpful because we can bring this to elected officials and to really convince them that we need this. Which brings me to my last point, which is that we are demanding an emergency enactment of this now. So we are asking everyone to contact City Council and demand that they pass this ASAP. It's free, it doesn't require a budget ask, and the rental services office has actually been almost fully funded to what we were asking for. So that's also great because that sets the stage once things are a little bit more stabilized with the current situation to start figuring out an infrastructure for how we can manage this and manage these harassment complaints. So I think that's it. Seamus, is there anything I didn't mention?
If I think of it, we can talk about it.
Okay. Okay, and I'm going to post all these links in the chat for everyone.
Perfect. Thank you, Lauren, so much. Want to remind people on the Zoom call or on Facebook that you can post questions in the Facebook event page or the Zoom chat, and we will address those after the panelists. Next up, we have representatives from the North Portland Tenant Collective. And pay attention because they got some really creative ways that they went about organizing with their neighbors, many of which can be copied if people want to do a rent strike. These are tactics that can be used. And Cameron Call is going to speak first, I believe, and Mario Correa might back him up. But Cameron, you can go ahead.
All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks, Seamus. Thanks, Lauren and Margot, for speaking. That was all really good stuff. So once again, I'm Cameron. I am here on behalf of North Portland Tenants Collective. We are just a group of tenants who decided enough was enough, and we got together. So all of this started at pretty much right at the beginning of the pandemic. We received a letter from our property management company, as many other renters did, that said, hey, we know stuff is uncertain. We know nobody really knows what's going on right now, but rent is still due. We still have bills to pay. So, it's important that you pay your rent on time. There were several other things in that letter that we didn't like. Kind of foremost among those was suggestions that we could put our rent on credit cards, and then also that we could get a job with Fred Meyer and Amazon and links to basically their recruitment pages to make sure that we could keep paying our property management company and our landlords. So I believe either the day of or the day after we got that letter, Mario, who is here, hopefully you can see him with his wonderful logo background, he sent letters to all of the people in our little apartment building here. He left envelopes just in front of our doors, weighed down by these little rocks that we have that are sort of used for landscaping here, that said, hey, this letter really rubbed me the wrong way. Let me know if you feel similarly, and we can get together and we can, send some kind of response. Basically, it was important that, we respond to this one way or another. We let our property managers know we're not okay with being spoken to like this. Here's these problems we have with the letter you sent us. My partner, Rebecca, and we said, wow, I'm really glad somebody did this. We reached out to Mario and we said, yeah, we're on board. We're gonna, help you reach out. We're gonna try to get something going here. So she and I went around the apartment building here, knocked on people's doors, and then stepped back so we could be properly socially distanced. And we just said, hey, we're your neighbor. We live in our unit over here, and we just wanted to talk to you about the letter that we all got and sort of get your thoughts on it and see kind of where everybody was at. We were very fortunate. Pretty much everybody in the building that we were able to talk to said, yeah, that really rubbed me the wrong way too. How can I help? So given that we had all that sort of interest, I went ahead and sort of started organizing a mutual aid network, because that was something people seemed really interested in, something I had heard about being really successful and also important, at a time like this more than ever. And also, we started kind of getting people's testimonies together, because we said, we're going to respond to the property managers and say, here's how the pandemic affected us, and here's why we didn't like what you said, and here's, what we have to say about it. We collected testimonies from a lot of tenants. I don't remember exactly how many we had, but it was something like 15 little stories of people saying, hey, I've lost income, I've lost my job, I've, all these things. And we sent those along with sort of a list of demands that we had. We hadn't quite fully formulated our demands by then, but it was asking for rental relief was kind of the big one. And then providing supplies so we could clean and sanitize laundry machines and other common areas. We were kind of told something vague about, we're going to do it more often, but nothing about how often that was. And so as time went on, we went back and forth. We eventually reached out to all of the other tenants, all the other buildings that are managed by a property management company. And we've just sort of been building it ever since. We've sort of refined our demands to this 30% of income rent cap that we're talking about. That's something we feel is really important. Some of the buildings were able to get the coin-operated laundry function removed, so laundry effectively became free, because it was a big problem for us to get quarters, right? I mean, a lot of banks aren't open. It's just tough to do. And so we demanded that everybody needs that, right? Not just the people where it's convenient for you to do that. And we are really importantly asking that nobody be in debt for rent that they were not able to pay through the pandemic. I probably don't need to tell anybody watching this, but that a lot of this represents money and wages that we're not going to get back. And so it's not a solution to say, you have 6 months to pay this rent that you didn't have the money to pay in the first place. It's a lot like what Margot was saying. It's just kind of delaying a wave of evictions. And that's not a solution. So really what we tried to do organizing is meeting people where they're at, sort of acknowledging where we're coming from, why the demands are important to us, and really giving everybody a chance to be involved. So the big way we did that was asking for testimonies of how did this pandemic affect you. Obviously, organizing is a lot harder because you can't go talk to people face to face, and you really shouldn't. However, we also have an opportunity here, given that the pandemic is a shared experience, right? That's something you can connect with basically everybody in the world right now is going through this. So getting that buy-in, asking people for their stories and giving everybody a chance to kind of be heard, right? Another thing we do is we have a nice little courtyard, right, that everybody's front door faces here. We try to once a week just get everybody out there, you know, kind of late in the morning. We all do our best, if weather permitting, to like drink coffee and just kind of chat about life, give people updates with organizing, and that's been really great too. So really, the big things to keep in mind are talk to your neighbors, connect with them, right? Everybody's afraid, everybody's had their income affected, everybody's dealing with COVID in their own way. And I think that's about all that I've got. So Mario, if you want to jump in with anything that I may have skipped or anything like that. Otherwise, thank you all so much. And please, please consider organizing. It's really important right now more than ever.
Yeah, thanks, Cam. I would just say, like, if you've gotten any kind of communication from your landlord and you feel upset or you feel slighted, you feel like they don't care about you, like chances are your neighbors are going to be feeling the same way. And yeah, it's more difficult to interact with your neighbors right now, but it's also like pretty easy to just write a letter, put it on someone's doorstep, get their contact info, and just get like a neighbor's group text or group email going, and it'll, if you're feeling agitated, your neighbors are too, probably. So yeah, that's all I would add.
Thank you both. I'm going to ask Mario and Cameron to post a link to their letter that they wrote to their landlord in the chat, because that letter, I think, is really a great tactic, and specifically how they had different mini stories from their neighbors on how they were affected financially. It really drives home the point that this is real life, and most people are being impacted financially, either by being laid off or by having part of your income reduced by less hours, or maybe you lost one of your part-time jobs. That's a real thing. So please, why don't you two post that in the chat section. Just a reminder that people on the Zoom call can ask questions in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll get to that after the panelists, or on Facebook also ask the question, and we can look that up also. Next, we have Sean Perez, who is an organizer. Well, now he's an organizer. A couple of days ago, recently he was a personal trainer affected by COVID, and he realized that the extent of this crisis and the need for action to be taken for himself and his neighbors. And he has a couple great, really creative tactics that I think can be copied by renters anywhere in a complex during this COVID crisis. And I'll let him take it away. Go for it, Sean.
Perfect. Seamus, first, thank you. And thank you to everyone prior to me. Great information. I'm going to come at this from like a story of what I went through personally and share with you what came up from that. So my name is Sean Perez, with the Forest Heights Tenants Association. I live at Sophie at Forest Heights. I was out of work, started March 14th. Be honest with you, for the first couple of weeks, it was boring, draining, it was scary. I did a lot of journaling, and every time I sat down to journal, I always came back to the same thing as what can I do to help? What can I do to help? And the same thing that popped up was let people know what you're going through. Take notes, share what you know. I was very grateful to have an attorney who was a client. It took me a couple of days to realize I could have picked up the phone. But prior to that, I created a note, one-page note of all of the highlights of everything that I knew everyone was going through. I felt like initially I was like a lone wolf doing this. I would like to share with you some of those highlights. So one of them is by collectively advocating to request a rent modification, we have a louder and unified voice as such, and more likely to receive what we are asking for. What I specifically asked for, I went out of my way because I knew everyone was in my place as well. I asked for 1 month rent forgiveness. And in addition to that, I asked for a rent modification for everyone. Another one, this was already previously brought up, is do not do a deferment. Can you imagine coming back 4 or 5 months later to an $8,000 or $9,000 bill? And I was actually told personally, you can put this on a credit card and we won't charge you. They were almost coming at me like they were doing me a favor, which it just made things worse. And everyone, or I should say most everyone, received a $1,200 federal check. I don't need to tell anyone here that $1,200 during a pandemic doesn't go that far. Nothing really has changed. So I took, and I have to tell you, I was pretty afraid. I was afraid of retaliation. I didn't know what they could do. I didn't want to be kicked out. This is a 160 unit place, so it's pretty large. And they're owned by a much larger company. So I knew that they had the power to do what they wanted to do. So what I first started to do is I took this note, which we will probably put up a little bit later, which was basically highlighting a lot of information that people didn't know. And I was putting it up at all the recycling areas for everyone to see. Well, come to find out, they were taken down by maintenance. And then there was an email dispersed to all the residents where I live. And it was telling people that they could not put notes on people's doors, that they could not do that, which that is against the law. So that's when I jumped on the phone to my attorney. He let me know, which I'm sure everyone here already knows, what I was doing, which I didn't even know I was doing, was creating, which is the equivalent of a union. Think of Norma Ray, everyone, when she said union, union, union. That's what I was doing, and I didn't know I was doing that. So I was protected. So I took that Norma Ray attitude and I went one step further. What I wanted the property management to know was I wasn't going anywhere. I knew if I was going to get them, my end goal was to get them to the negotiating table. I didn't honestly know how hard it had to continuously do something. So my next move was a letter. And if you would be so kind, I'm going to actually read the letter to you, okay? And this is something that I would encourage, if you want, please steal this idea, because I've been told that it's pretty good by famous. That's true. The letter requests a modification to the current rental agreement due to COVID-19 pandemic, offers a solution and expected results upon Pinnacle Property Management's decision to accept this request. The problem: Pinnacle Property Management's lack of compassion action during COVID-19. At this time, Pinnacle is not providing relief for tenants in the financial crisis due to COVID-19. Pinnacle is merely offering rent deferral, not rent forgiveness. This results in a kick the can down the road approach that increases the length of time during which tenants, neighbors, and community members face uncertainty over how to catch up, snowballing monthly payments to make up for unpaid rent when tenants can't even afford the base rent, which was brought up earlier. Due to rising unemployment and the continuation of Oregon's state of emergency through July 6, it will be unlikely, if not impossible, for residents to catch up on the rent, especially at a time when physical needs, food, housing, supplies, family obligations, school, daycare closed, vulnerable populations needing support, and safety concerns. Access to healthcare and maintaining social distancing are paramount to individuals and the community. The solution, rent modification to provide relief to tenants. We understand businesses must continue to pay expenses and employees, but also that corporations are better able than individuals to absorb temporary hardship via business loans and insurance. As a compromise, the Sophie at Forest Height Tenant Association is asking for 1 month rent forgiveness, retroactive April 1st, 2020, followed by a negotiated percentage-based rent reduction for tenants until economic conditions and unemployment rates are back to pre-COVID-19 numbers. So the tenant-landlord relationship can continue forward in a positive way. The expected result, continuous income for Sophie. Sophie at Forest Heights will collect uninterrupted monthly rental income throughout this devastating economy caused by the worldwide COVID-19 pandemic, and tenants will be better suited to pay for their immediate needs. So I personally went to every apartment home, knocked on doors, stood 6 feet away, okay, and explained this to them and explained the benefits. I even told them how to do it. I said, we're gonna make this so simple. All you have to do, date it, sign it, put your apartment number, property manager of Pinnacle Management. Well, I don't need to tell you that I got great news. No, I didn't get great news. The great news I got was over 21% of people contacted their property management. And I know if I would have done this before, it would have been a lot higher, but you know, how often does a pandemic happen? So I was grateful. Someone mentioned earlier that the law firm Greenspoon, I'm saying that right? He did. And once again, I would like to share that with you because I find it quite comical. So remember, I was going around to help people, okay? So their letter says, Dear Mr. Selinsky, which is my attorney's name. This letter is followed up to the correspondence sent to you on April 28, 2020 regarding your client. That's me. Please be advised that Mr. Perry's has been posting these documents on the doors at the Sophie at Forest Heights. My clients, the tenants here, have received multiple complaints. Doesn't that make sense? From residents asking that he not post anything to their doors, some citing health concerns related to COVID-19. That's stretching it. As you can tell, I like to put in my own 2 cents. My clients are requesting that Mr. Perry's respect the wishes of the residents of the property and cease such posting. Now, what I find ironic is that I live at this is a large place. If you get in trouble, let's say, they would just have the property management. And if I'm correct, isn't this my attorney told me this is like the third most expensive law firm in Portland. So I find it kind of ironic that they just sent this to me, that they had that much money to just do that. And it was just asking me to stop. And what I want everyone to know is most people, me included, prior to me calling my attorney, would have been intimidated by that, because everyone freaks out when you get a letter from an attorney. You know, that's usually the only thing an attorney has to do is write a letter, you know? So I was fortunate, I got 2. And the second one was almost a carbon copy of the first. And I asked my attorney, do you think they still build the same? And he said, yes. So, because that's what they do. So a lot of people have already said the same thing what I'm going to say. I didn't know what I was going to do. And I was done having a pity party on my couch. And I had to do something. And I was scared, honestly, for the first couple days. I mean, I got up at 2 a.m. to go put these things at the recycling center. And then when I went door to door, I was confronted by the maintenance man who lives on site. And at that time, I already spoke to my attorney, so I had all my confidence back. And I said, you're the one that took down my signs? I was irritated. And he literally put his head down in shame and said, I was just following orders. And I told him, I said, did you know you were stealing? Because that's what he was doing. So
Well, and
yeah.
Sean, I want to let you know that tenant organizing is protected by law. We need a lot more protections for it, but if you put up notices and say this is put here by the tenants union, then you know, and say like don't remove it, and I can give you some language, but they're not supposed to interfere in any way with tenant organizing. And so just so you know that there are some tools there.
Yeah, I didn't, at that point, my attorney told me to name myself something, you know, I didn't know what it was going to be. So Forest Heights Tenant Association obviously had a nice ring to it, but I can't tell you that feeling powerless is like withering away. And it didn't take me that long, and I was grateful. And let me tell you some stories that happened when I went door to door, because I talked to a lot of people. People were so grateful that I was doing this. People were afraid to do something. They were happy someone was doing something. I came across a couple, they were both working, and they were really kind, and I wanted them to do it. I didn't know what I was going to say to them. And I told them a story of what just happened. I said, you two are working. So if you don't sign it for yourself, do it for your neighbor of a single mother that has an 8-year-old girl. And as soon as I said that, he signed it. So it was, I wanted to get as many people on board with this, because it really is, as we all know, it affects all of us. And we kind of live in a bubble when we're working. We're like, okay, we're fine, that's someone else's problem, you know? I came across a woman that she was so grateful that someone was doing this. And I think it was in conjunction of her just being in her apartment for a long time, which I can relate. She just started sobbing right in front of me. And I think she was just relieved because of the stress. And I think we all are pretty much aware that we're going to have a depression epidemic because of what this. I mean, I was literally experiencing it when I was going, you know, from apartment to apartment. You could read the stress on people's face. They were almost paralyzed by fear to do anything. They were afraid that they thought that if they even challenged the property management, that somehow they would be homeless. Because let's face it, when you move, it's not cheap. You have to put your first, last month, and so on and so forth. So, and they know that too. So I don't really, I would like to say, because this really touched me, that I got 2 gifts at my door from tenants. They were so happy with what I was doing that they sent me plants. I was so touched by it. I was just doing it because I needed to do it. And I'm kind of, once I got off my pity potty, I was very much in an activist minded, going, I'm not doing anything, might as well do this. And then I really started getting into it. And the more people I talked to, they were so happy and expressive. Finding plants at my door just kind of blew me away. So yeah, you know, kindness. I don't have anything to share beyond that, believe it or not. So if anybody would like a copy of this, just ask. It's the letter. You could modify it for your apartment, okay? Because I do think rents absolutely need to be modified. They need to go down. I mean, I live in Forest Heights. Just the name alone sounds expensive, okay? I like it because it's quiet, but I'm in the same boat as everyone else. So, yeah, okay. I'm done.
Thank you, Sean.
Yeah.
We'll get a copy of that letter that Sean had sent out to his neighbors. Just to reiterate, it was so powerful that he gave them a template that he encouraged them to send to the landlord about a rent reduction, and dozens of people sent it in. And that's a powerful collective action, so to speak. Next up, I want Candace Avalos to unmute herself. She is a candidate for City Council, and she is endorsed by Portland Tenants United. Our membership is the ones responsible for endorsements, and they looked at the candidates to see who was most pro-renter, and they chose Candace. And so we decided to give her a couple minutes to talk to us directly about herself or her campaign. So go for it, Candace.
Great, thank you so much. Hi, everybody. So again, Candace Avalos, running for position 1. I am running because I feel that
Candace, Candace, I just want to interrupt, just let you know your video is muted if you want us to see your face. If you don't, it's fine. I just wanted to let you know in case you didn't know.
No, I don't know how to unmute it. All I see is audio.
Okay, okay. You don't have like a stop or start video at the bottom of your screen? I love that we all know how to like Zoom. Technical glitches are now just a part of all of our lives. Okay, yeah. Sorry, carry on, Candace. I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to.
No, you're good. It's probably just because I'm an audience member, I guess. But yeah, I don't see.
Yeah. Okay.
That'd be true. Go for it, Candace.
There it is, I think. Okay. Now can you see me? Yes? Okay.
Yes, now I can see you.
Okay, hi everybody. So good to see you all virtually. So I'm Candace Avalos. I'm running for position 1. And thanks for giving me a moment to just say a couple of things. I'll just say that, you know, I'm running because I feel like I represent a generation that's left behind by the economy and left out of the conversation. And, you know, I'm a renter, obviously, and I'm concerned about my ability to not only in the future, hopefully maybe be able to buy a home. You know, I'm 31, I went to grad school, I did all the right things, but I have this like astronomical student loan debt. I basically pay 2 rents. It's my student loan debt and my rent. So, you know, I feel there's a lot of people that have these kinds of experiences, and until we are in positions of power to actually influence these policies, I don't feel that we're going to be represented, which is why I decided to run. So I definitely, I came here because I wanted to hear more about what kind of work you all are doing. I'm new to the tenant organizing space. but I obviously have many values shared with all of you. And I want to make sure that we're protecting people, especially as we're, looking at post-COVID-19. I mean, I'm very concerned that a lot of people are going to lose their housing, and what are we going to do then? And we really need to make sure people can stay housed, because it's just a lot easier to help them long term. So I'm going to be advocating hard for more rental assistance to just keep people where they are as we continue to try and address the growing houseless crisis already. So those are just a couple of my values. I definitely would encourage you to check out my website at CandiceForPortland.com. Obviously, I hope that you vote for me, and I hope that you want to see new leaders and new voices in City Hall. So thank you again.
Thank you, Candice, so much for coming. Just to reiterate, PTU membership voted to endorse these candidates. For the Facebook people, let me tell you that for mayor, PTU has endorsed Sarah Iana Rome. For seat 1, Candice Avalos. For seat 2, Margot Black. And for seat 4, Chloe U. Daly. Our membership believes, based on their questionnaires they answered for us, and they're committed in their actions, that they are the most pro-renter candidates, and you must vote by Tuesday. If it's too late to mail in your ballot, you must drop it off. If you need PTU to come by and pick up your ballot, we will do that for you. And let's transition into the Q&A portion of the event. I'll facilitate some of the questions that you people put up on the Facebook and on the Zoom chat, which you can still put up if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment. The first question, I think, and this is for any of the panelists. If you're a panelist, feel free to chime in here. A person says, I have a mortgage and I want to show solidarity to the renters movement. I thought that was interesting because a lot of people make a distinction that I'm a homeowner, so it's not my issue. Well, if homelessness is your issue, then tenants' rights is also your issue, because we want to prevent homelessness. We also want to get people into homes, but evictions create homelessness, and we are coming upon a mass wave of eviction and new wave of homelessness if rent debt is not forgiven. Just to say that. So anyone in the panelists want to answer the question, how can a mortgage holder, a homeowner, show solidarity with renters? Go for it, anybody.
Well, attending stuff like this is a great start. I mean, just getting informed about kind of where tenant organizing is, kind of the state of things, is pretty much the best way you can start. So just based on sort of the realities of organizing, right, we're just going to be reaching out to neighbors in our apartments and sort of around. Would that we could get flyers out on every door everywhere, right? So sort of being here, getting involved, I've seen a lot of, rent strike, rent forgiveness signs up in people's windows. I mean, that's a small thing, but it means a lot to me personally when I see stuff like that. Of course, getting educated on where city, county, state politics is on the issues, and sort of voting with those values in a way that sort of aligns with you and that will help people like this is ultimately one of the best ways you can help us, right? Because eventually, one way or another, this has to go through policy. And then if you do hear anything, if you happen to live near apartments or anything like that, just reaching out to anybody who is organizing and just saying you appreciate it. It can be a lot of work. It's a lot of emotional investment to organize like this, and even just small acts of appreciation. Like Sean, when you were talking about getting gifts, like little plants, I thought that was so touching, right? So just any little way that you can show your appreciation and support, be that verbally or with a sign or face-to-face, is great, with proper social distance, of course.
I just wanted to add, I think when there's council testimony about a policy, like for example, if the tenant protection ordinance were to come before the council for a virtual testimony, I know from past experience that having homeowners speak in support of renters, which are community members, right? We're not just renters, we're Portlanders who rent our homes. And so having homeowners really recognize that and speak to that is really helpful and powerful.
And I answered the question in the Q&A, and I'll reiterate here, related to both what both of you said, just supporting these actions. Joining PTU as a supporting member, dues are $5 a month, and that's like the member dues. You can make a larger contribution each month if you're able to afford it. What those dues go towards is like photocopying for all of these flyers, for example. And when we can have in-person events, sometimes we have to pay for the space and the food. And so really membership helps support all of this organizing in various ways. And that's really important. Also, then you'll get emails about calls to action and mobilizing, so that, like Lauren said, when there is time to testify, you'll know. Cameron said, if you live next to an apartment complex, get in touch. One good way to do that is by being a part of your neighborhood association, which renters also can be part of the neighborhood association and should be, although a lot of us know that the neighborhood associations just really aren't that welcoming or hospitable to us. And so that doesn't mean we shouldn't go, but having homeowners there helping say, no, these issues are important and we need to make time and space, and helping, like we've often asked neighborhood associations in the neighborhoods where these buildings are organizing to help us, sign the petition or call city council. And sometimes the NAs are great about doing that. And other times they're like, we don't really know if this is an issue, or we're worried about the landlords too. And that's where we really need the homeowners there, who help say, look, this isn't just like an us them, this affects all of us. And that solidarity is really helpful in those ways. And it also helps connect and support those tenant unions if you are kind of carrying some water in your neighborhood association. Also, because we're just about to vote, something that I have heard from a lot of folks is, okay, I get that you're really great on renters issues, but what about homeowners? And I have lots of different ideas for what I want to do as a city council member, as I'm sure Candace does, and we know Chloe does as well. But it's really important to have renter voices on the council. And so what we need from homeowners is to tell their other friends how important that is, that this is representation, and that if renters get the support, then our neighborhoods are going to be healthier and better, because there's not going to be so much turnover, and we'll have more people with like long-term investments in the community. And I don't mean dollar investments, I mean just invest with our heart and soul to make the community happy and healthy. Like everybody wins, but that means that we need the homeowning folks to say, hey, almost all of our elected leaders ever and everywhere are homeowners. Don't worry about what these renters are going to do for homeowners. Elect them because they need to, they are the only ones who can do what they do for renters. And when you say, oh, well, these are really good people and they'll still be champions for renters, of course they will, maybe, kind of, but it's not the same as living it and experiencing it. And we really do need that representation, and we need more homeowning folks telling the world why it's really important to vote for folks who are representing renters. And something I forgot to say a minute ago, and I want to say it because I saw Amber's comment. The Rental Services Commission is Portland's forum, only public forum for landlord-tenant issues in the city of Portland. I'm a commissioner on that forum. On that commission. And it meets once a month. It was canceled in March. It was canceled in April. But we're meeting on Tuesday from 2:30 to 5 p.m. It's a Zoom meeting. I will post the link in this chat, and we'll also make sure we get it sent out to folks afterwards. But there is public testimony. And what I am asking everybody on this who's watching right now, I'm asking our panelists, I'm asking our homeowner friend, whose name I forgot because I can't see the Q&A right now, tune in and sign up to testify. You'll probably get 2 minutes to testify. Renters, we need to hear your stories. Folks who can't pay their rent, we need to hear about it. If your landlord's been bullying you, we need to hear about it. Normally at these meetings, it's half an hour for public testimony, and sometimes we don't even have anybody testifying. And that has to do with the commission is whatever. The commission needs its marching orders. And if we get deluged with renters telling us pass the tenant protection ordinance, pass a rent freeze, create rent relief, and it's just over and over and over, stories and demands and stories and demands, then that gives me as a commissioner on the Rental Services Commission the power that I need to look at my fellow commissioners and say, okay, well, we have to do something about this, right? We can't just ignore this testimony the way that we often ignore the testimony because of the dysfunction of the commission. But I am there to try to make this commission actually do stuff. And so I need folks to tune in. And it's so beautiful because you don't even have to take time off work and come downtown and find parking on a Tuesday afternoon, which is why nobody usually comes. You can just tune in on Zoom. And so we'll send that link around because you do have to register to get into it. Otherwise, maybe you'll be able to watch without it. I'm not sure. We'll figure that out. But if you want to give testimony, make sure that you follow the instructions that I'm about to post here and actually sign up and register and look at your email for the link just so that you're not trying to do that at the very last minute. And if you have any questions about the RSC, Rental Services Commission, you can ask those in the chat and I'll answer them. But I forgot to mention that earlier. So.
Let me just add that the Rental Services Commission, that did not exist before Chloe Daly was elected as city commissioner, and nor did the Office of Renter Services exist as a city office in Portland. That's just to make the point clear that prior to that election, there was very little city infrastructure in place to help renters, and that infrastructure is still pretty weak and not funded adequately. Unlike other cities like New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, who have a longer history of tenants' issues being represented in the city government, Portland is very new to this. And so the victories we've won at the city level, they're still fresh and they're still reversible in many ways. And that's just, again, to consider the consequences of this election, to re-elect Chloe, elect Margot, Candace Avalos, and Sarah Inaram. I want to, a question we had about utilities, and I think Margot might be the best one to answer this question. This person asked us, I've noticed many property management companies have begun shifting the cost of utilities onto renters during this crisis. And do we have any recourse to this regard? Margot, what do you think?
Am I still? Oh, I thought I was muted. Okay. So yeah, this is a real common tactic, is passing the utility charges on through a third-party biller. And there are, so something I need to look up is the inflating charges. My recollection, again, I need to emphasize I'm not an attorney here. My recollection is that they are not allowed to charge more than the actual cost of the utilities. But I think they can pass on whatever fee they are paying to the third-party provider. The problem is that if you want to look at your bill, you never actually get to see the bill from the Water Bureau. You see your bill from the third-party provider, and that, you know, so then you don't really know, are we paying an inflated charge or not? What I want to say about utilities is, A, there's a lot of work to be done on utility justice. Our utility, you know, our apartments are not efficient. We are often paying for utilities we don't use, whether it's our apartment complex's sprinkler system or the water in our coin-operated washer and dryers. You know, at my last apartment complex, there were 2 water meters for like 300 units. And so our bill was based on how many people we had living in the unit, and not how much water we used, which meant I could leave town for a month and still have to pay $100 in water at the end of the month. And there are prescriptions for how that's supposed to be in your bill and in your rental agreement. And so one recourse for renters is to get you know, an attorney to look at that bill and to look at your lease language and see basically if they have described everything correctly. If they haven't, then we have actually been very successful with class action lawsuits. You know, we just need one tenant to find an error in their bill or in their lease language, and then we can get everybody else signed up on a class action lawsuit. An error in the billing is actually a month of rent per bill. So those class action lawsuits can be very rewarding for renters. At Wimbledon, we had one where basically the bills were, you know, we had 12 months worth of bad bills. You can only ever go back for 1 year in landlord-tenant stuff. And so the folks who joined that class action lawsuit got, you know, a month of rent for the 12 months, or that was what was sued for. So that is one recourse, but we have a lot of stuff we have to do at the policy level for utilities in terms of requiring efficiency and better billing. And that being said, this is also, you know, utilities are also something that you can organize your neighbors around. So like the North Portland Tenant Collective, right? Or Cooperative Collective. One of the things that they demanded early on was make the laundry free. You know, no coin-op washers and dryers for right now, and they won that at their complex. And like high water bills, inefficient heating and whatnot. These are things that tenants can come around and organize and say, hey, landlord, it's not fair that these bills are so high. You got to, you know, do something. And so it's a good demand to organize around, but in terms of what we can do outside of organizing or policy change, it's, sorry, the law kind of sucks on utilities and there's work to do. And so scrutinize your bills, scrutinize your lease. Maybe PTU can put on like a utility bill clinic where we can kind of all come do that together and then figure out if we have something to go knock doors for. So.
Thanks, Margo. I'm not sure if we have any other questions in the chat, the Facebook group. Any panelists want to make any comments before I kind of do a wrap up?
I can just add to what Margot said about the laws kind of sucking around a lot of this. Of course, there is the policy perspective on this that, like, at the end of the day, the policy does need to be addressed, but the way that we can kind of create pressure for that to happen is through tenant organizing, right? They need to work in conjunction with one another, right? There's pressure from tenants that kind of hits landlords where they are going to be paying attention, which is of course their wallets. And then that will sort of give urgency to the policy efforts. So it can be very discouraging. You know, I know as well as anybody to kind of understand legally where you actually stand. But this is a really good way for you to sort of take that into your own hands as much as you really can and sort of advocate for a better world and a better future. So on one hand, yes, it is scary, but it is possible to kind of use that fear towards something a little bit more proactive and productive that I've actually found has helped my sort of mental and emotional state throughout this, knowing that I am advocating for myself and for my neighbors that I care about has really helped me get through this. So it is scary, but it's also motivational.
Any other panelists?
Not having power is a big deal, as Sean already told us, and organizing with your neighbors and realizing that you're all in the same boat and that if you stick together and work together, you can win is, yeah, it's a game changer in terms of our psychological outlook on this.
Any other panelists have any final words for people as we wrap up?
Yeah, I would just say the circumstances that we're in right now, just with the eviction moratorium, it's a pretty unique time to organize, and I think that it's an opportunity that, you know, if you've been scared to do so in the past, like now is a time when you do have, even if it is a small amount of protections, at least until the end of July, to really try and seize as much power as you can with your neighbors. So yeah, don't let it go to waste.
Anybody else final words?
Yeah, I can add one other thing. Sean's strategy of providing a template to his neighbors is a really great example of how to kind of take advantage of one of the very few advantages that we do have, right? Because of course, legally, everything is more or less structured to benefit landlords and like sort of the property owning class. But what we do have is numbers. And so that's a great way to leverage, like I said, one of the very few strengths that we have, but it is a very important one. So the volume that we can potentially generate by sending letters, by getting people to, contact city council or state government or what have you, that sort of thing is really important. And consider, how can we really play to our strengths in these kind of heights?
Yeah, I would like to reinforce what Cameron said. And, let it be said, in 8 days, I got 2 letters from the attorney, which obviously I've made them take notice. And I can't reinforce the idea of don't let up. Keep going, keep going. I have a new information that I'm going to be passing out tomorrow. I could be doing most of this by email, but I want them to see me. I want to bump into a neighbor 6 feet away, of course, but I want them to see me. I want them to see me with a bunch of paper. I want them to know that I'm not going away, because my goal is to get them to the table, and I know I can do it. So, yeah. And also, one thing I forgot to mention, this property management company is large. They're $6 billion. I don't care. So I called my congressman and I asked them, because as what we've all heard about the first stimulus money, about larger corporations like Ruth Chris getting $20 million, which we all know that they shouldn't have. So they got that money because they have the attorneys, they have the accountants, and they have the ins at the banks. And what was told to me is the people that are in charge of the loans, they call them first because they get larger commissions. So I didn't get anywhere, unfortunately, with any useful information with my congresswoman. So I took it upon myself and did a Freedom of Information Act, because if it does come out that this management company did get a loan, that's an ace in the hole. I will go public. So yeah, so stay tuned. Yeah, so yeah.
Well, and $6 billion worth of assets, we have to recognize, because Wimbledon, or Prime Group, which owns the Wimbledon apartment complex that we organized last year, were $9 billion in assets. And we got to recognize $1 billion is a lot. And these are the outfits that do not need any public subsidy at all, because at Wimbledon anyway, it's 600 units and an average rent of $1,500. We basically figured out that they could give tenants free rent, all the tenants free rent for a year, and it was like less than a tenth of a penny. I could redo the back of the envelope calculation in turn, like on a $100 bill, basically. I mean, $1 billion is a lot of money. $6 billion is a lot of money, and your rent is just negligible. And what we saw with Wimbledon is they had a $20 million lawsuit, maybe $25 million lawsuit against them for failing to fix a staircase that then rotted and somebody fell through it and injured themselves. And so it was a personal injury claim, and the $20 million was the punitive part, which I guess is not typical in a landlord-tenant law case. You don't normally get punitive damages, and those are supposed to be big enough. It's basically what was explained to me is that punitive damages are supposed to be so big that its intention is to punish the party so that they will correct their behavior, because otherwise they will have to pay those big bills. But it was pennies for them. They didn't even really try to defend it. Now they're going to tie it up in appeals. I mean, basically lawlessness is a cost of doing business for them. They don't have to follow any of the laws. They count on tenants moving out or not knowing better. And on the rare occasion where we lawyer up and sue the heck out of them, they're like, oh, let me find some pennies in my pocket. Okay, we're gonna go back to just slumlording. And this is something that, you know, we can't, like, this is not okay. It's just not okay. You have to, you know, it takes more work to become a licensed manicurist in this state than it does to become a landlord. And we need, you know, it's just not okay that our penalties are, you know, less than pennies on the dollar for these big guys, and they don't care. So, you know, it's really going to take massive solidarity and organizing to do what needs to be done. But as Mario said, this is the time, you know, like the fear any other time is, you know, retaliation through eviction, and they really just can't do it until July. And so this is our time to go organize with our neighbors and demand what we deserve.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight.
Sorry, I one thing. Sorry, I just wanted to really quickly plug the sharing your story in support of the tenant protection ordinance. It really, really, really does make an impact. So I'm going to post that link once again in the chat. And also, I just wanted to mention we had a May Day action, which is really still ongoing, to ask for things at the state level, like a rent freeze and rent amnesty, and ways that can be done. So I'm going to also put the link for that so people can find out more information and who to email. That's it.
And I'm going to say one more thing before Seamus does. Promise it's the last thing. Really vote. Vote. Talk to your neighbors about voting. Tell your friends to vote. It is a fact that renters are a low voter turnout demographic, okay? The other people running are counting on that. And I mean the other people who are not renters. Chloe and Candace and myself, we need renters to vote. Don't assume that other people are going to do it for you. If you need us to drop off your ballot, or you come pick up your ballot to drop it off for you, let us know. Everybody needs to literally text everyone they know in Portland and all their renter friends and be like, hey, this really matters. As Candace just said in the chat, there's 4 seats open. This is a decade-defining election. The city charter will be cracked open early next year, where we can change all sorts of things about how we govern and how we engage the citizens of Portland, residents of Portland. This election matters so much, and we absolutely have to get, like, the working class and the renters to vote like their rent depends on it, because it literally does. Tuesday.
All right. A couple other things you can do. You can join PTU and become a dues-paying member. It's cheap. It's a membership-driven organization. And you can testify via Zoom on Tuesday at the Renters Services Commission, push relieve rent debt. And another good thing is find the Facebook page, PDX Renters Unite. It's a great forum for renters to get their questions answered about rent issues. That's PDX Renters Unite. And thank you all for coming tonight, and we'll hope to see you soon and vote on Tuesday. Thank you so much.